She thought it was real. The way he looked at her, how his attention felt electric, like being chosen in a crowded room. It didn't feel like manipulation. It felt like destiny. But in reality, what she fell for was not him. It was the version of herself she saw reflected in his carefully orchestrated behavior. The most unethical way to attract love isn't through honesty or connection. It's through emotional distortion, disguised as intimacy. It begins slowly, not with a compliment, but with curiosity. He studies her wounds before she even realizes. He's looking. He finds the space between her self-worth and her desire to be seen, and he slips into it like a shadow. He doesn't overwhelm her with praise. Instead, he mirrors just enough to feel familiar, but leaves space for her to chase. More, that space becomes the hook. She starts to confuse anticipation with attraction. The absence of clarity makes her crave presence. She tries to decode his silences, overthink his pauses, and in the process, she mistakes her anxiety for chemistry. What's happening is subtle. It's not love blooming. It's dependency forming. Emotional hunger grows when you are given just enough to hope, but never enough to rest. This is not connection. It is emotional hijacking, and the cruelest part is that it mimics romance. He doesn't yell. He doesn't even touch without consent. That's what makes it harder to detect. It's ethical on the surface, but beneath it lies a strategy so manipulative, it rewires her nervous system. The intermittent validation, sometimes he's warm, sometimes distant, creates a psychological loop that keeps her anchored to the potential of what could be, not the reality of what is. Carl Jung wrote about the dangers of projection. When we are not in contact with our true self, we project our unlived desires onto others. She sees him not as he is, but as who she needs him to be. He becomes the savior of her loneliness, the mirror of her feminine essence, the answer to wounds she hasn't named. Because he knows this, consciously or not, he plays the part. Not to heal her, but to keep her attached. You can spot this pattern by how often you question your worth around someone who once made you feel divine. At first, he lights you up. He listens to your soul like no one ever did. But then he starts to withdraw. Not fully, just enough. Enough to make you initiate more. Enough to make you feel like the connection is slipping and you have to earn it back. And when you finally pull away, he comes close again. The cycle repeats. This is not the dance of twin flames. It is the cycle of nervous system manipulation. He doesn't need to say much. His greatest tool is timing. He appears when you need reassurance, disappears when you need consistency. And because you felt something powerful in his presence, you assume the loss of it is your fault. You try harder, you open more, you love deeper, and none of it makes him stay. Why? Because the goal was never love. The goal was power. And in a world where so many women equate being chosen with being valuable, all it takes is a man who knows how to create intensity, not intimacy, to hijack her sense of self. Jung also said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. She calls it a soul connection. But it's often just a soul wound responding to someone who knows how to pull on it. The chemistry she feels is not love. It's familiarity with emotional pain. And that pain is often the echo of childhood, where love came with conditions. She's not broken for falling into this. She's human because when someone makes you feel seen in your most vulnerable state, it's easy to mistake that for safety. But safety doesn't feel like confusion. Safety doesn't disappear when you ask for more. Safety doesn't punish your needs or reward your silence. The most unethical way to attract someone's love is to awaken their heart without the intention of holding it. That is what this man does. He becomes everything she ever needed, until she needs him. And then, slowly, the version of herself she saw through him begins to disappear. She blames herself. She wonders what she did wrong. She doesn't realize the game was never about her. It was about how far he could go before she noticed he was never really there. Women caught in this pattern often say, I've never felt anything like this before. And they haven't, because it's not love. It's trauma bonding. It's the powerful illusion of belonging created by someone who studied her insecurities and presented the perfect antidote, only to withdraw it later. This isn't always malicious. Sometimes, these men are wounded too. They learn that control feels safer than vulnerability. They don't know how to be loved, only how to be needed. So they create a void in the other person to ensure their place in her life. And when she becomes emotionally dependent, they feel valuable, even if they have no intention to stay. The most painful part, the woman often knows, deep down, There's a moment when she feels the truth rising, but she silences it. She wants it to be real. She wants to believe this is the story she waited for. She convinces herself to hold on just a little longer. But love that requires you to betray your own intuition is not love. It's survival disguised as devotion. Carl Jung taught us that healing begins when we face the truth we don't want to see. And the truth is, you don't have to keep proving your worth to someone who only shows up when it benefits him. You don't have to accept half-love in the name of patience, and you don't have to confuse emotional intensity with emotional health. You can walk away, not because you stopped loving him, but because you started loving yourself. Before we go deeper, here's something that might change how you see all of this. If you've ever been the kind of woman who felt drawn to a man who mirrored your soul but left you feeling empty, the JUNG method can help you understand what's happening beneath the surface. The link is pinned in the first comment. You thought it was love, because everything about it had the flavor of love. He looked at you like no one else did. He saw things in you that no one had ever acknowledged. The way he spoke, the way he paused to listen, the way he leaned in like he was hearing your heart, not just your words. It all felt real, so real that your body believed it before your mind could process it. You didn't fall in love with him because he was perfect. He fell because he felt familiar, and that familiarity was intoxicating. But what no one told you is that not everything that feels familiar is safe, and not everything that feels like home is healthy. You started to mold yourself around him, not because he asked you to, but because deep inside, a part of you believed that if you became exactly what he needed, maybe this time you wouldn't be abandoned. Maybe this time you would finally be enough. So you gave more. You stayed up when you were tired. You answered when you didn't feel like talking. You smiled when something inside you was collapsing. And every time he pulled away, you leaned in closer. You confused his distance with mystery, his coldness with depth, his inconsistency with emotional intensity. And because it was intense, you called it love. But what if it wasn't? What if it was a performance? What if it was the most unethical way to attract your love? Not by giving, but by withholding. Not by meeting you, but by mirroring you. Not by building a relationship, but by triggering your deepest wounds and making you believe that healing could only come through him, because that's what this was. It wasn't love. It was emotional manipulation, dressed as intimacy. The hardest part to admit is that you felt it. You felt that something was off. You sensed the shift in energy, the pauses that lingered too long, the vague responses, the emotionally charged silences that made you question your worth. But instead of walking away, you blamed yourself. You thought maybe you were being too emotional. Maybe you were asking for too much. Maybe, just maybe, you were the problem. And that's when he had you. Not because he trapped you, but because you handed him the key. The truth is, women don't fall for emotionally manipulative men because they're weak. They fall because they're empathetic, because they feel things deeply, because they believe in the good in people, because they want to fix what's broken, even when that brokenness doesn't belong to them. And that's the tragedy. You didn't fall for him. You fell for the role you played in his life. The healer, the savior, the one who could love him into wholeness. But love doesn't work like that. You cannot bleed for someone and call it a bond. You cannot set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm and expect that to be enough. Eventually, your soul starts to ache. Your spirit starts to withdraw. Your heart begins to whisper truths you don't want to hear. And one day, you wake up, look in the mirror, and realize that the woman staring back at you is not the one you remember. She's dimmer, quieter, smaller. That's when it begins. The unraveling. The moment you stop waiting for his text. The moment you stop checking his social media. The moment you stop playing the role and start reclaiming your voice. At first, it feels like grief. Because you're not just letting go of him. You're letting go of the version of yourself who believed that pain was the price of love. You're burying the illusion that if you gave more, he would stay. And in that burial, something is reborn. You start to see that real love isn't confusing. It's not inconsistent. It doesn't leave you questioning your value. It doesn't punish you with silence or reward you with attention only when it's convenient. Real love sees you, not just when you're glowing, but also when you're hurting. Real love doesn't play games. It builds. It nurtures. It makes you feel safe in your own skin. But here's the secret no one tells you. The most unethical way to attract your love only works if you've been conditioned to see chaos as connection. if you've learned to associate inconsistency with passion, if your nervous system is addicted to the highs and lows because stability feels foreign, and that's not your fault. That's the imprint of old wounds, childhood patterns, emotional neglect, abandonment wrapped in familiarity. Healing begins when you stop asking why he did it, and start asking why you stayed. Not from a place of blame, but from a place of curiosity. What part of you believed you deserved that kind of love? What story were you still telling yourself, that you have to earn affection, that you're only lovable when you're needed, that your value is in what you give, not in who you are? When you answer those questions, the spell breaks. His face fades, the fantasy dissolves, and all that remains is truth. A painful, powerful truth that liberates you. You were never unlovable. You were simply loving in places that could not hold. You were pouring into cups that were full of holes. And no matter how much you gave, it was never going to be enough. Not because you weren't enough, but because he was never meant to receive what you had to offer. Now, you return to yourself. You begin to relearn what love feels like, not through him, but through you. You take yourself out to dinner. You speak to yourself with kindness. You honor your boundaries. You stop chasing closure. You stop explaining your worth. You stop begging to be seen, because you finally see yourself. And in that moment, the most unethical way to attract love loses its power, because you're no longer available for it. You no longer respond to chaos. You no longer mistake intensity for intimacy. You no longer crave what wounds you. You crave peace. You crave honesty. You crave someone who speaks your language, not just in words, but in consistency. You become the woman who is not impressed by potential, the woman who does not chase, the woman who does not settle. You become magnetic, not because of how you look, but because of how deeply you know yourself. And that kind of woman, she cannot be manipulated. She cannot be controlled. She cannot be used. She is love. She is the source. And when someone finally meets her, truly meets her, it won't be because he used unethical ways to attract her. It will be because he was drawn to her truth and stayed for her soul. Asterisk, you stop asking if he'll ever come back. You stop rewriting the story to fit the fantasy. Instead, you begin to write a new chapter where your peace matters more than his presence, where you no longer feel the need to make yourself small just to be chosen. You start to breathe differently, walk differently. You no longer move with the desperation to be loved, but with the quiet confidence that you already are, by yourself. You don't need the chaos anymore. You don't crave the unpredictable highs that leave you empty on the other side. You crave steady love, peaceful love, the kind that doesn't rush in only to disappear when you need it most, the kind that stays, that holds you not just in desire, but in care, not just when you're pleasing, but when you're vulnerable. That love begins with how you now treat yourself. You begin to trust your body again. The tension that once signaled excitement now feels like a warning. The anxiety you once confused for butterflies now feels like a scream. You've learned to listen, to slow down, to check in with yourself before handing your heart over. You understand that just because someone mirrors your soul doesn't mean they deserve access to it. Connection isn't proof of compatibility. Intensity isn't proof of safety. You're not hard to love. You never were. You were just offering your softness to someone who didn't know what to do with it. Someone who saw your light and thought they could survive off it without ever offering any of their own. But love isn't one-sided. It isn't survival. It isn't sacrifice without reciprocity. It's mutual recognition, mutual effort, mutual presence. And now that you know what love isn't, you can finally begin to welcome what it truly is. More breadcrumbs, no more half-love. No more relationships that feed off your empathy but starve your soul. You walk away not because you're bitter, but because you're finally full of the truth, full of self-respect, full of a quiet kind of power that doesn't need to be seen to be felt. You've outgrown manipulation. You've outgrown games. You've outgrown being impressed by inconsistency. What you seek now is peace, depth, clarity. Someone who sees your worth not as a prize to win, but as a privilege to protect. Someone who doesn't light a fire in you just to watch it burn out. Someone who meets you where you are, without asking. You too shrink to fit their capacity, and when that someone comes, you'll recognize them, not by how loudly they speak, but by how gently they stay. Not by the intensity of their pursuit, but by the softness of their consistency. Not by the drama, but by the ease. Because now, you know better. And because you know better, you'll choose better.